Hello, Sloanies. Greetings from New York. My name is Asha Aravindakshan, Sloan Fellow, class of 2017, and I'm thrilled to welcome David Smith of InFlow Analysis and Nicki Catchpole of Technology Business Review to speak with our Sloan alumni and students. Quick housekeeping. You are on mute and your video is turned off. You can use the Q&A button in the menu at the bottom of the screen to ask questions during the session. This session will run the full hour with our discussion and your questions. There are no slides. Then in a week or so, you will receive an email from the MIT Sloan Club in New York with the recording. Dave and Nicki, as a reminder, will be joined by MIT Sloan Business School alumni and students joining us from 10 countries from around the world, including our regional clubs across the US, East and West Coast, Brazil, Colombia, Denmark, India, Nigeria, Peru, Switzerland, and the UK. They work for Global 2000 companies, family businesses, and their own startups. Sloan's mission is to develop us into principled, innovative leaders who improve the world and generate ideas that advance management practice. And in that vein, we host today's Technology Trends webinar to inform the Sloanies on the latest in customer experience, employee experience, cloud computing, and artificial intelligence. In our pre-submitted questions, I saw significant requests to discuss work from home in light of the pandemic. So we'll be sure to address this topic at length today. I also want to highlight an interesting trend that I saw in our 55 pre-submitted questions. The first registrations were local to the New York metro area, and those folks submitted what I would say are basic to intermediate level questions about technology. While the next batches of registrations from outside the area, mainly the West Coast and the rest of the world, submitted more intermediate to advanced questions related to technology. Just an interesting observation to see the maturity and technology knowledge across the different regions where we have alumni. And it also reinforces the importance of cross-pollination of knowledge in our professional journeys through mediums like today's webinar for Sloanies. Next, let's meet today's speakers. For those of you hearing from Dave and Nicki for the first time, you're in for a real treat. A quick intro. Together, they run the Nicki and Dave Talk podcast, interviewing technology executives. Their episodes are 15 to 30 minutes in length and are a great listen. Dave Smith is the founder and CEO of InFlow Analysis, which he started after a long career as an industry analyst at Gartner and Aragon Research. I met Dave 5 years ago at the HR Tech Conference in Las Vegas as he was examining people-centric strategies for technology enabling business processes. Today, Dave will share his views on digital workplace tech and trends, employee experience, and customer experience, which are more commonly referred to by their acronyms EX and CX. Nicki Catchpole is a senior industry analyst with Technology Business Research, with previous experience in management consulting and strategic alliance management. She studied Chinese and speaks Mandarin. Nicki will share her insights on cloud and related technologies such as artificial intelligence. Our conversation today is going to flow from tech trends to cloud computing to AI to CX, EX, and wrap with work from home. Dave and Nicki, let's start with tech trends. So Dave, I'll ask you first, where do you see, tech trends in 1 year, 5 year, and 10 years? How fast are those tech trends going to be affecting other industries?
Sure. Well, thanks for having me for one, and hi, Sloanies, right? So honestly, if I could predict 5 to 10 years, I would definitely be a rich man. The one thing we've learned in these times is that things change drastically and literally overnight, as we're seeing now. And so technology is ever evolving, right? And it's evolving at a rapid pace. And so that any one of our 5 to 10 years, our predictions of trends can seem kind of way out of date, even before we even get published a blog or article about it, even before this webinar is finished, right? But the interesting thing and what happens is that in its evolution, technology's ability, to change and progress gets even faster. And so like the rate of acceleration that we're even seeing now with the COVID-19 pandemic, it will become exponential. In regards to the workplace, definitely we're seeing, AI, machine learning, data science, cloud, and mobility, AR, VR, edge computing, IoT, consistently trend from a tech perspective. And my colleague and friend Nicki, I know we'll get into some of that even more. But the overall trend, or even an undercurrent really, to me, is a move towards experiences. With everything that has happened, we're moving more towards design principles in tech that will be more about how people are actually experiencing work and the technology solutions themselves that they're using. And so I know we'll get into employee experience a little later, but the takeaway for me is that those in technology-based careers but also those outside of it, that specific demographic of IT, need to keep current on tech trends and also the people trends that are evolving together and will be in combination impact the evolution of every career path or profession. And so, Nicki, I know you have some specific thoughts and on trends that you're seeing that you want to get into as well.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks, David. Again, thank you, Asha, for inviting us to this special event. With regards to, just to piggyback, Dave, on what you were saying with, tech will start to have to bend to what the customers need, whether they're technologists or not. That is a trend that I am seeing across the board in terms of cloud adoption. You don't just say, or you don't just hear anymore, oh, I'm going to think about adopting the cloud. And that's not how the IT companies are thinking about it. They are being much more consultative and understanding that someone doesn't just blanket adopt the cloud, that they have to think about what is their privacy, what's the nature of their privacy concerns, what industry are they in, what cloud should be private and public, what do they still want on-prem. So the number of times I've had to write, for instance, hybrid multi-cloud when I write up my vendor reports for analysis is increasing dramatically, even in the last 6 months, which shows that people are not only moving towards the cloud, and the cloud being kind of a very strong indicator of overall digital transformation, but they're being cognizant that they don't have to be told what to do and that they can create their own journeys. And this is also evidenced by the recent, and I'll go into this a bit more later, but more emergence of industry clouds. So clouds being specifically tailored to certain industries with very niche demands. So that's just kind of blanket cloud, couple of interesting trends that I've been seeing in terms of customization and, putting the customers first. And I guess the other area that I will go into much more deeply later is an even more blanketed term, which is AI. AI is, not to be trite, but the future. We breathe it now, we use it now, whether we realize it or not. It touches every aspect almost of our lives as people, and will continually drive business change and transformation at an accelerated pace this year. And we'll be doing some really interesting, cool things. Sure, in the next 5 to 10 years, I can't even imagine, as Dave said, but that's certainly a trend to keep your eye on and continuously learn about as it changes itself all the time.
No, that's great. I think both of you just set up, our conversation really well. And so I want to take it back to Dave and talk about how can we best track these emerging changes that we've discussed so far.
Yeah, and that's another one, right? That if I really need it, I'll be a dangerous guy, right? But honestly, I think everything changes, and again, we're in this constant, state of change. When I worked at Gartner, we used to use the hype cycle to analyze trends and to track them through their life cycle. So we've learned in the past 8 to 9 or 10 months now that a pandemic can just change everything. We predicted in all our models overnight, and so I think our best bet, is focusing not only on the technology trends landscape, but on people centricity. And so you'll probably hear me going back to that a lot in my discourse on things, but people behavior is key. But definitely from a practical standpoint, I recommend every org sort of develop, for all intents and purposes, a trends map that you can use to track technology trends. And the data for that is going to come from industry research sources of all kinds, right? Like myself and Nicki. and I like a hype cycle kind of
Analyst.
model. Yeah, exactly, right? And so I like a hype cycle kind of model, mixed with real people behavior data and analysis for that. So you're tracking the actual technology trends themselves, but also the people behaviors that in a lot of cases are pushing those trends.
That's amazing. So we go to our next question here. Dave, throw it back to you. Do you think that the tech industry will continue to expand over the next few decades?
Oh yeah, and the expand. I mean, even right now, right during a pandemic, the tech industry is like blooming, right? It is blossoming, So if you look at, say, the big titans, Amazon, Apple, Facebook, Alphabet, Google, Microsoft, they've gotten stronger economically, during this time. So I think in terms of expansion, we'll definitely see that, but we're also going to see some interesting things where they will evolve and begin to start adding adjacencies to sort of propel their growth. We already saw, Facebook, they've added their workplace, entering into, enterprise digital workplace technology, right? In adjacent to their consumer stuff. And so we'll see all the other vendors sort of evolve and move towards adjacencies for the most part.
And we'll see those adjacencies come through both M&A and probably internal development, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay. And Nicki, how about if we take this to current technology? What are the digital giants, the technology titans, how are they reacting to these changes?
This is a very top of mind as we're right in the thick of earnings season. So I have plenty of examples, and there are a couple that really stick out in my mind that R&D titans and that are doing some incredibly expansive moves that will not go unnoticed, and they're not just ripple effects. Like, these are major shakeups in the technology world. One being the very recent, I think a couple of weeks ago, spinoff of IBM's global technology services business. It's not a mini spinoff; it's a $19 billion part of its business that it is, but it's not entirely selling. So that's an interesting aspect as well. They're still maintaining ties. There will still be each other's strong partners, or maybe even each other's largest customers. So that's one that was not expected. IBM already shook things up quite a bit with a historic $34 billion acquisition of Red Hat last year. So they're probably the best example to look at a major company making major changes in the midst of a lot of turmoil and a lot of change anyway. So, and a lot of this is also centered around the focus on hybrid cloud. I mentioned hybrid cloud at the beginning, and I'll continue to. Whenever I write a cloud report about any of these industry titans, the hybrid cloud is at the heart of their digital transformation journey and where they're looking to help their customers go. And a lot of the hybrid cloud work will be powered also by AI. So none of these kind of sit in silos in of themselves. There's a lot of linkages between how these technologies work and how they play into one another. Fujitsu is another example of a company that historically very siloed in their portfolio, based in Japan. And last year they said, you know what, we're going to get rid of most of our IaaS service, and we're going to completely reimagine ourselves as a digital transformation company and sell prolifically outside of Japan and turn ourselves into a cultural awareness hub. So this is an example of a company that is reforming from within and also partnering to dramatically expand the scope of what it does, moving towards as a DX company, as well as shedding its more legacy portfolio. So those are two examples that are top of mind. I could speak to like 3 or 4 more, but I thought they were different enough and significant enough to highlight here. And then another kind of flip side is that, we talk about titans, but titans are also being helped and augmented by niche players. And there's an increasing amount of niche players entering into their portfolios, whether to fill needs because they're doing something really nimble in a certain area that helps the certain project, or just become a potential acquisition target. We've seen plenty of that where, one example I can think of in the edge computing space, Siemens acquired Pixium 3, which was a really nimble edge player. And now Pixium 3 spearheads and powers Siemens' entire industrial manufacturing for edge. So just one example of how niche players are out there becoming more prominent, a huge part of the ecosystems, and will also likely play into a lot of the M&A and merging activity that we see going forward.
That's amazing. I think that lends really well to our next question for Dave, which is, what are the software needs that you see businesses having in a COVID world?
Yeah, so exactly right. Definitely people have growing online needs now, whether it's, it's dealing with remote work or keeping their existing applications running smoothly without issue. Organizations have to sort of solve for that, right? So there's just this increased demand for websites, online services, et cetera. So orgs have to sort of deal with internal changes happening within their own workforces. They have to ensure more than ever that their online channels are working properly as people are, switching to remote work. And so as teams are now sort of physically separated, you have to now ensure consistent and high levels of productivity, as well as fostering a culture of collaboration or a collaborative culture. And then the other piece to that is now with remote work and people in sort of different places, security becomes the primary concern, with potential vulnerabilities with cyber attacks. So definitely greater cyber risk. So I think it's just a matter of sort of moving towards the new environment, having the new realization of, okay, we now have to foster change.
Oh, that's great. And we're going to touch on some of the cyber questions when we get to the work from home section in a little bit. So here, Nicki, to wrap up this section, what opportunities do you see for those people who are not hands-on tech people? We have, a lot of business leaders on the phone who are not technologists. What would you recommend?
In terms of, I'm actually by background not a technologist either, so
Perfect.
Very firsthand. I would say that just the proliferation of information out there on some of these sites are a statement of the obvious, but real like LinkedIn. I didn't really use LinkedIn before the pandemic, except if I was looking for a new job. The number of communities and people willing to engage who are leaders is really extensive. That's how I've been learning. I tag certain leaders who I admire, and when they recommend something or when they have a post, I generally read it and I generally learn something from it. And it will sometimes link back to something that I did or augment some work that I did. So just becoming a much more proactive member of communities like that have opened up. I have not yet participated in Facebook Workday, but and Dave can speak more to that, but I know that the linkages that those types of communities present are boundless and seem kind of like, oh, well, why would I want to join a community? That seems kind of like it won't help me. They actually do. And people are, because we're stuck at home and we're not having these communication avenues, are sharing some pretty profound things that we all can learn from, especially if your learning curve is still kind of at the bottom and you're looking to learn a lot more and on your own.
And to me, I guess with everything going on, IT teams now are under pressure, to keep things running and communications open. So I'm seeing they're doing a lot of high level triage and working from home and have to do it all sort of efficiently. So I said, what's the end user to do now, right? And so in some cases, end users are on their own, so we see accelerated demand, so for things like low code and no code solutions, they've been sort of steadily growing.
Yes.
And that's the trend that's been going on, I guess, for years now. So we obviously see that a lot with startups, low and no code approaches are very popular.
A lot more citizen developers entering the space.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. People want to implement the apps that they need at the time they need it, right? So
that's amazing.
A lot more catering to the development community. I mean, we're being increasingly nice to the people who make the products us thrive and live. So I've seen a lot of work done to make developers' lives easier, whether it be through automation or machine learning.
Absolutely.
And don't even need the no code or low code. They know how to code. So even on the flip side, where there's been an enablement push to help them be more productive for all of us.
Mm-hmm. Oh, it's amazing. I think that's super helpful for the group on the phone. So here, let's go to cloud computing and artificial intelligence, for the next 10, 15 minutes. And, starting with Nicki, cloud computing is a broad subject. You've talked about hybrid a couple of times. How do folks go about learning about cloud in, this very complex technical world?
I would say first and foremost, and I kind of hinted at this at the beginning when we were opening with trends, is to look inside yourself, your soul, but look inside your industry.
Look inside yourself.
what your business needs, what would be the impetus to move? What are your pressures? And to communicate that to a provider that you feel comfortable with. Like cloud professional services providers that act as advisors are all over the place, and the revenue that they're generating now as advisors, helping people move to the cloud, helping organizations move to the cloud comfortably. There's multiple ways in which you can approach this. And there's also multiple vendors that people can choose from. Vendor lock-in is a scary thing that a lot of people thought the cloud did at first. They didn't want to just be locked into one particular vendor, and I won't even pick on one particular vendor. But each of the vendors do offer certain things that, when taken in aggregate, can give a customer as close to a customized solution as possible. And the vendors themselves are working together in order to do this. They all collaborate. Well, they still compete, but they collaborate in these ecosystems, realizing that they can't put a brick wall up anymore and not collaborate with one another. That was the past. And so customers now have this really great choice not off the shelf, but to pick who they want to work with and what they want to work with and kind of create their own migration destiny to the cloud.
And with on-premise, it was so easy to be in your little bubble, in your silo, and not with other companies, adjacent companies, or even your customers, in a way that really produce collaboration and new products. So I think that's really good advice. And it lends to our next question, which is what do you see as the next big thing in cloud computing?
I absolutely see industry cloud as being the next wave in cloud computing outside of hybrid cloud as well. I hadn't really seen too much of it even last year. So the fact that there have been several major announcements, IBM had a series of announcements related to their financial services cloud, which I think is a really good one to highlight because it's not only a cloud that collaborates with a big banking partner in Europe, but it's also a cloud that extends to a consortium of other banks who have similar needs and similar challenges. So it's kind of like a learning feedback loop for these thought leaders in Europe who are facing specific challenges, around compliance in Europe and their own regulations, GDPR. They're not going to be as comfortable in a North American cloud, of course. And then the third step of what I think is really interesting here is that some of these players are influencing the direction of the technology innovation. So there's now like a financial services cloud innovation center. So all three of these kind of dovetail together to making this highly tailored and well-informed series of consortiums that IBM has started to gather in Europe for financial services, which undoubtedly will use as a blueprint to do so in other major verticals like healthcare or telco, et cetera. And SAP was another example. The portfolio of industry cloud solutions that were highlighted in the last earnings call definitely show that's where they're putting their focus. They're putting their focus on being specific to the needs of manufacturing companies need certain aspects and need certain tools, and that differs dramatically to what you may need in healthcare. And niche players again can fill in some of these gaps. So I can see as these industry solutions grow, we'll either see a lot more consolidation or just a lot more partnership on both sides.
And I think what these companies are finding are predictable, repeatable, scalable processes within these industries that are, where they have customers and they're able to create these clouds to then benefit them, right?
Absolutely.
Yes, exactly.
That's amazing. All right, let's segue over to AI. Nicki, what's the future of AI? What's in your crystal ball?
I laugh when you say that always because it's like such a fantastic and prolific and large topic, and one that is really difficult to unpack because it really is everywhere. I mean, not to be trite, but basically AI is the future. It's not some kind of thing that you saw in a movie maybe 2 years ago.
Right.
We're using it today, whether we realize it or not, with like Siri or Alexa, with those kind of static robots. That's AI in its most basic form. Robotics can be extended to more complex use cases when you start to think of working from home and where you can't be coached by your manager, or you're siloed. There are these now algorithms that artificial intelligence, they can measure your voice. They can, when you don't know the real answer to a question, they can do some pretty interesting things with natural language processing that is all filtered up into coaching feedback from robots. And there was a poll, I forget who did the poll, but it was something like 47% of managers said, I think that's a terrible idea. I would never be willing to use that for my employees. And then once they were given the chance to experience it and use it in conjunction with their real-time feedback, something to the effect of 85% said they'd be willing to use it, which is exactly the same number that study reported that people were willing to do with actual live coaches.
Wow.
So that's just kind of a great example, I think, that shows how the scariness or just the hesitance to use AI can be quickly dissipated once someone has some exposure and actually sees that it's usable and more friendly and impactful than they had originally thought.
We had piloted one of these tools earlier this year, and it's so interesting. It actually will join a meeting like this as like a fourth party to the meeting, record everything that's being said, transcribe the notes verbatim, highlight where we say things like, Dave is going to do X by Y date to capture the action items for you in a list. And it plays back the recording for you. I mean, and you can search for keywords, right? I can say, how many times did Nicki say cloud in this meeting, right? And it'll It's amazing.
Or I could even say, was Nicki confident when she was talking about cloud in this meeting? I mean, they can
The sentiment analysis as well, right? You know, and
exactly.
if you think about like a customer meeting, it's like, what was it? Customer sentiment? Were they angry? Were they happy? Were they sad? What are the concerns?
Exactly.
And it has like a color gradient, red, green, yellow on the conversation flow. So no, it's very, very high tech is what it is.
I know. I wonder if we should have one for this session. Maybe.
Turn one on right now.
Yeah, exactly.
Dave, let's talk about AI trends. What's actually improving the business outcomes and customer experiences?
Yeah, exactly. So even like before the pandemic, it hit, right? AI and specifically branches like machine learning was already like a major disruptive force. And it's funny, as Nicki was talking about cloud computing, I was thinking, it's like, man, you know, it's these forces like in combination, right? That's really causing a great impact. You know, it's intelligent clouds now, right? And forcing those together, you know, but this disruptive force is moving across all industries, you know, for the most part. So self-teaching algorithms and smart machines are and will be playing a huge role. We're even seeing it being applied now to COVID, right? The thing with AI is that it's the one thing that's going to change and changing how we go about our daily lives, whether it's how we work, play, and just basically live, right? So with big data analytics, there's a tremendous need now to make sense of all that data. Organization, we have tremendous data within every organization. And so how to quickly analyze and interpret it to make better decisions. As a real data point, that's what we're seeing now with COVID and tracking the spread of the virus around the world, because now we have new ways of collecting and aggregating data so we can work with it better. So that's some of the most critical applications and uses of AI in that area of public health that affects us all, right? But for businesses with a strong move to digital right now, especially with the pandemic, gosh, Amazon is seeing strong sales results right now. I think up 40% over the same period last year. So we now have AI tools and platforms already in place to help businesses better understand customer behavior and how their customers are adapting to the current environment and reality. And so a lot of organizations are playing catch up now, who were laggards in some uptake in digital channels, you know, for customer engagement, nurturing those relationships and overall commerce. They now see the urgency and are trying to sort of get up to speed, right? Play catch up quickly with personalization and behavioral analytics. So we'll see, I believe, specific tools focused on self-service access to these technologies be very prevalent next year in 2021. It will be a competitive differentiator for business. Because I do believe right now the customer experience will serve as a major differentiator for business over price of their services and offerings. I think AI will be really critical in that.
That's amazing. Self-service, folks, here to stay. You heard it here. All right, let's switch over to customer experience and employee experience. So Dave, tell us, what's been the trend of adoption for CX and EX programs?
Wow. So the first thing I will say here is that customers are redefining how they engage with brands, right? And that's we're doing it right now. And we're definitely seeing that now during the pandemic. And the glaring truth is that it's not so much about the brand's experience, it's the customer's experience, right? And brands have to realize that, or it's game over. And in a similar vein, we're seeing an evolution with the employee experience initiatives and trending that companies are starting to realize that, hey, the priority they need to place on employee engagement and how the employees are actually experiencing the workforce is critical. So if we take them, I guess, one at a time, I believe it was PwC research study, and this is sort of pre-pandemic, that showed, let me get this right, it was 59% of global consumers surveyed felt companies had lost touch with the human element of customer experience. And 75%, right, of customers surveyed preferred to interact with a human versus an automated machine.
Right.
So customer behaviors, right, have and are changing. So CX leaders have to recognize the shift and keep pulse with the changing dynamics, which means that brands now have to stop trying to create these, static customer journey maps for customers and realize that just like it's the customer's experience, it's also the customer's journey. And customers are on multiple journeys within multiple channels and want to engage with brands exactly how they want to engage, so don't try to force your journey maps on them. This is why I mentioned to you previously, Asha, why I really like the Sprinklr model of listen, learn, and love, because when it comes to customer engagement and customer experience, that's so critical. You have to listen to your customers. And so with employee experience, there is a direct correlation between engaged employees and a company's bottom line. but beyond that, the current pandemic has shown a light, I think, on the need to better care for employees and treat them as people, because they are, right? Because now that we're all remote, our work, our professional lives have merged with our home and personal lives. And so companies have to take care of their people.
And that connectivity and feeling like part of a community is so important right now, especially as we don't have an end in sight of when we're going to go back to the office and things like that.
Exactly. Super flexibility is needed.
Absolutely. So on that point, how do you use technology then to balance like a white glove bespoke service and scale that during the pandemic?
Yeah, so this is where I think customer data becomes super important. And Nicki was talking about AI and automation, and this is where it applies right here, right? This is where it becomes super important, because you will need meaningful customer interaction data. Meaningful customer experience is built on a foundation of data, and that data needs to be kind of in one place, central and accessible. So we have customer data platforms, CDPs. Coming from Gartner, I was joking with Nicki yesterday. I've been responsible for creating a lot of alphabet soup. Not particularly this one, but we did another acronym I know. Customer data platform, CDPs, are one way to achieve that. But clean, easily accessible data is the key. So virtualization, keeping your data where it is, replicating in real time in a central location, is a good means towards data centralization that will minimize compatibility problems and delays in implementation. So now that data has to actually inform interactions with customers across their complete entire customer journey in whatever channel they're in. So for instance, with your customer facing staff on a live call with a customer, needs that sort of contextual customer data in order to provide white glove services and a meaningful experience to that particular customer. And that's actually personalized, where they feel like, oh, this person knows me, right? So They have to sort of feel that personalization and that sort of intimacy. And so that requires some automation and popping up that info into an agent in real time. And that automation is going to be critical when the customer touch point is digital and not an actual live person, right? That white glove experience still has to be there. So this is really intelligent orchestration, as I like to call it, where you're linking multiple channels and implementing business logic to serve up response or interactions based on certain triggers and custom histories. And then that really ensures you can deliver contextually relevant experiences automatically. And so from the customer perspective, white glove treatment goes from a luxury to an everyday possibility, where it's not just, this is just what it is. This is the norm, right? And so when you're able to, I guess, provide that, customers will definitely reward you in kind, obviously, with repeat business and most of all, loyalty.
Absolutely. And so, switching gears into future of work, how do you see companies using technology to enable a better future of work? And what are implications of AI then on, customer experience?
Yeah, so so people want to be able to work, I guess, whenever or wherever they are, for the most part, and with strong connectivity. So we'll see a convergence of technology forces. I think I mentioned sort of alluded to this before, working in tandem to empower the future of work. But I've always said it is really the now of work. The future is now. So mobile, cloud, AI. IoT, broadband, and even now a new generation of workers entering the workforce are all impacting how we work. And so AI is providing automation. Like I mentioned before, it will bring real-time customer insights based on data for enhanced customer experiences. And so that's where the bespoke white glove services will be automated for high-level touch engagements and experiences for customers.
Awesome. And then here to wrap up this section, what do you see as the most direct link from the workplace, employee experience to customer experience? And what's the roadmap where EX converges with CX?
Yeah, so this is all about experiences, right? If you kind of get a gist of my soapbox and while I talk about, but people experience. And so there is a direct and undeniable link, I think, between EX and CX. You cannot improve or address one without the other. And I believe it was a Towers Watson study some years ago that showed out of 50 organizations that they sort of study and review, those that scored high on employee engagement and experience also had higher earnings. So the link is unmistakable. Employees who are having a better experience in the workplace will ensure customers have better experiences with the brand. And so it's not even a convergence, so to speak. They're just that inextricably linked. So brands looking to improve CX and drive ROI have to focus on better employee experiences. And other studies show, companies that lead in customer experience have 60% more engaged employees. And so there's so many studies, right? Study after study has really shown that investing in employee experience impacts the customer experience and it can generate a high ROI for the company.
The link is undeniable. Oh, that's amazing.
Absolutely, yeah.
Take us then to our last section here is going to be focused all about work from home. As I mentioned, this is where we had the bulk of the questions that were pre-submitted before the webinar. And so Dave, kick us off here. Let's discuss emerging trends in workplace digital transformation.
Sure, absolutely. So, we're now in this COVID, we're all going through the same thing together, right? So this pandemic I think has brought upon us all a new realization and understanding of work, customer experience, personal home lives, and daily new learnings that will impact and change how we do business for the foreseeable future, for the most part. While we've talked, ad nauseum about, digital transformation, and we've, we've been to conferences, right? We've known experts and thought leaders to tell us about it in books and all the different conferences that we've been to. The reality is that it's been thrust upon us, forcing business of all sizes into a transformation that many were just not ready for. And so the experts did not give us a playbook for that, right? And so there is now this huge cultural shift that we face in managing our business and home lives during this time of transition and transformation. So those two worlds, which we compartmentalized and considered separate, have now merged. And this is something that Nicki and I have been sort of seeing on our podcast, talking with different, leaders and executives. The overwhelming realization is that they were never separate to begin with. So due to this, CEOs and enterprise IT leaders are faced with the challenge of, how do we manage business continuity, remote work capacity, and the core reality of employee morale with the full understanding that everyone's situation is unique. So this current transformation exposed the human need for connectivity and collaboration. And so thus we saw, real-time collaboration tools like Zoom, other digital workplace technologies like office productivity and team collaboration tools increased in usage. And so the need for workplace security heightened as well with cybersecurity initiatives and so forth.
Oh, that's great. And so Nicki, what do you think are some of the biggest negatives of a digital workplace and how can we address them?
I think the first and foremost in my mind is, the lack of human touch. We're not meant to be in the same apartment or house with the same people for weeks or months at a time, no matter how fond of them we may be. We're meant to be creatures outside and we have curiosity and like to travel. And, that's just first and foremost that jarring change, which I think, people are now kind of finding ways to work around safely. But, beyond the obvious one, I mentioned this briefly before, the mental health aspect. There's been, I don't think it was really addressed at first when everything was crazy and no one really knew how long this would last for. But, experts are saying that there has been a spike in incidents of depression and, people reaching out saying that they need help. So just being workers being cognizant of that about their coworkers as well as managers and HR, just, checking in more than they might have if people go into the office and just making sure that people are doing okay as they are managing things that maybe that we have no idea about in their home lives and, maybe just homeschooling kids or going through something else. Also just the demise of heavily impacted industries such as travel. I think there's a lot of workaround that we can do and it's been amazing, but as great as AR, VR is, AR, VR on the beach is not the beach. So just the hope that there'll be some rebounding there in the future. And I know those industries are doing the best they can to cope. But, on the flip side, and Dave hit on this too, like people are using the tools that are provided and the technologies to feel closer to their coworkers. I mean, I feel closer to my coworkers with our 15-minute call we have every morning.
Right.
Then I know more about them. Like I know that they have dogs and I know their kids' names and people are much more open and know about my boss is building a shed in his backyard. And I mean, I wouldn't like that. So in an inadvertent way, it has brought, I don't know if not everyone shares my experience, but for me personally, it's brought me and my colleagues closer, and I feel more apt to kind of call and say, hey, I'm going to be in the car driving at this point. Can you take this call with this client? And
right.
whereas I might not have been able to do that before, felt comfortable before. So
I think that's great. I love that you highlighted a daily meeting on your team. We have the same thing also. It's been 8 months now of a daily 15-minute call just to check in, make sure everyone's doing okay, no one's feeling isolated. Yeah. And some of our teams that operate in shifts, they do 2 calls during the shift, at the beginning and at the end, just to make sure that the team stays connected. I think it's a great practice, and hopefully it stays, long after the pandemic.
Yeah, I agree. It's become very ingrained for us.
Yeah, I think too, with COVID, it's definitely this sort of need, as you guys saying, to sort of navigate how to work together remotely, right? There's emerged, I guess, in my estimation, sort of a serious realization of, just like you guys saying, let's take care of people, right? We're all going through the same thing at the same time. And to me, the digital workplace is no longer, just like a place or some sort of destination. It's an experience that we're all having. And we're having the same experience now, during this pandemic. So definitely, put people over profits at this time, I think.
It's people over profit. That's perfect.
Yeah.
And so our next, set of questions are related to trends on remote workplace. And, folks even asking specifically, is there a trend within the US about going permanent from work from home? And who's going to follow? So Dave, why don't you start us there?
Yeah, so there is a serious trend right now of, obviously, I'm in the Bay Area, if you again didn't know, in San Mateo, around less than 10 minutes from Mexico Airport, around a half hour, 20 minutes outside of the actual San Francisco city. And so here in the Bay Area, we were, I guess, the first really sort of like the tech companies here just mandated, work from home. When the pandemic hit first off. And so I know there are regional differences, but we sort of led the way here in terms of work from home. And even now, I think Facebook, they're and most companies, or a lot of tech companies here, they've also extended that through, I think, mid to late 2021.
I think it's the Silicon Valley companies are leading right now.
Yeah,
engine of work from home in 2021.
Exactly. And a lot of it is we're seeing, again, back to what we were just saying before, we're seeing this now new focus on people. Now you have, who, someone who may be, work on the most important project in your company, and you don't want to break them. And so how do you sort of, understand that they have a life now? They're now, at distance learning, with their kids, and they also have to be on that 9 a.m. meeting and report back on the project initiative. And so, again, you don't want to break, but you want to make sure, that they have the time to take care of their stuff. And so the sort of more flexibility is going to be needed to actually do that. And so that's a big reason why we're seeing this drive to sort of more work from home, more flexibility. When we do get things, like vaccines and so forth, we'll definitely see more of a hybrid. And I think we're going to go to some of that in our sort of crystal ball section of this, but we'll see some shift to that. But yeah, definitely right now for the foreseeable future, we're definitely going to see work from home and then move as we can to sort of hybrid environment.
Actually, let's go ahead, Nicki.
I was just going to piggyback on that real quick and say I could almost see like a flexible version of hybrid where those situations like the WeWorks for people who might not have the need for infrastructure of an office, but taking that model and applying it to organizations, like an organization having like a WeWork space for 2 days a week.
Yeah,
they don't need the space for 5 days a week, or doing some kind of model like that builds on the flexibility and kind of almost like scheduling space versus having your own static space.
Yeah,
go ahead.
Sorry. So companies, just what Nicki said, we're seeing some companies here in the Valley really thinking about that, thinking about, hey, we don't need all of the space right now. And so, now they're going to become their own little WeWorks, and just rent stuff out, to startups and so forth. Yeah. Sorry.
And that's because it actually segued into, I was thinking about physical workspaces, and especially in large cities, right? Do you see companies just downsizing their space and going to this WeWork model where teams maybe come in to rent a conference room, or not rent, but use a conference room for a couple hours for a team meeting, and then everybody goes and works from a coffee shop or goes back home?
Mm-hmm. I could absolutely see that happening. I mean, I worked in New York for years, and I just actually visited, I drove back up yesterday to New Hampshire where I live now, and the number of buildings that are, I know there's been another surge in the pandemic, so that's part of it. The number of these fantastic, magnificent buildings that are just sitting empty? Like, how long can that persist? What are they going to be purpose for other things? Will they turn into homes? But probably not, because people are leaving cities in droves as well.
Right.
So there's a whole lot of unknowns around what's going to happen there. But in the short term, for the hybrid environment, some people might be remote work all the time. But I think hybrid is probably going to be the future for the majority. And hardly any back to the full normal. I can't think of many instances in which that would be the case, although I'm sure there's some.
And then we had a very specific question about like work environments related to research settings and how are they going to be further transformed by digital tech? Nicki, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, I think this kind of ties back into part of that AI that I led with the robotics. So this is not a robotics answer, but there are some research learning platforms that build upon ones that we already have today. Like at the most basic, we have Google. You're looking for a paper on something, and Google's still pretty good. It comes up with something you're generally looking for. But what more and more platforms will do in research environments will take in your personal preferences, how you research, your learning gaps, needs from potentially maybe evaluation reports from your robotic coach or your human coach. Will start to point you in the right direction of research and the types of information that you're potentially looking to fill in. And it's kind of like a natural. What's great about AI and ML is that it learns with you as it goes. So if you say no, that's not the way I want it to go, it will pivot and will likely take you further to where you want to go. Even into the depths of certain really long papers will pinpoint some information that it thinks based upon your needs and your previous research that will be helpful for you. So that's just another way for me to shamelessly work in the benefit of AI, but that's going to be a big part of it, I believe.
No, I think that's great. And then Dave, what are some technologies that have been identified as necessary since COVID broke out?
Oh gosh, right. So we're on one right now, right? So we're Zooming, and I think so real-time collaboration has been key. So it's when everyone's sort of working from home, right? We're all dispersed. How do we connect? How do we communicate? How do we collaborate? So all the digital workplace technologies, like Zoom, video conferencing, stuff that I've covered, for so long, right? We're now seeing the emergence of the necessity of them to foster connectivity, to foster a culture and an environment of collaboration, right? And so digital workplace technologies, team collaboration tools, the Slacks and Microsoft Teams and so forth, all those things that are working in tandem to provide some form of connection and to help people to still communicate and still collaborate and actually work on projects and get things done.
Oops, sorry. I was asking, do you have any concern about data and how it should be protected during this time?
So I'm not sure if Nicki was, yeah. So the data piece, and that's where sometimes we get into some of the cloud issues. Yeah, we're definitely going to see. And right now, I guess I'm speaking with a CISO. Actually, Nicki and I had a podcast with a CISO recently. Where that's one of the big issues that they're worrying about. How do we begin to not only protect against cyber attacks and all the cyber risks, but how do we sort of manage and maintain the data now that everyone is so dispersed and local data? How you sort of manage that data. And it's managing, I call it your content is on the move, right? And it's accessible from every device everywhere with all your employees. And so how do you manage? So that's a huge and huge concern right now, for CISOs and security professionals.
For your employees just to be more vigilant about where they're taking their laptops, where they're leaving it, who can access it,
exactly.
Even mobile devices, right?
Exactly.
That's important. Okay, let's segue to an AI question. What role does AI play in work from home? How can we address, how can AI address working more remotely? And how does it impact our ability to juggle work and home responsibilities?
I think outside of the ones that I already hit on around the coaching and the learning platform, AI can just help make a lot of the analysis, the laborious analysis of a tremendous amounts of data, can take that off of people's plates. And it's been doing so for a while, but as the proliferation of data continues to increase, especially because there's so much more being pumped into the system, if someone's hesitant about using that, they're probably not so hesitant now. So that would be one area. Automating tasks that were wrote, whether you have to do them actually on-prem or whether it was a rote task that you might have to go through, ticking off the boxes for, for certain financial exercise or audit exercise.
Right.
ML and AI can take care of a lot of those tasks, and by using the data that's provided and do it with pretty startling accuracy. So I would say from productivity as well as just saving time and automating tasks. So free up your time to reskill and learn other things that you need to do your job in this new normal. You don't have to do those things that took forever anymore.
Yeah.
That's amazing. And so, there's so many opportunities here. And if we're all going to be stuck at home for, many more months, we need to start exploring this. And I love the reskilling, upskilling motion that we can take advantage of ourselves. We don't have to wait for an employer to prescribe that to us. That's great. Here, Dave, here's a fun question. What do you think is the impact on COVID-19 on investable opportunities?
Investable opportunities. Oh, wow. So that's, I don't know, Nicki, you want to help me on that one? So that's, so tech stocks are good, but but definitely we're seeing, where, the tech industry, right? That's where we're seeing I think they've accounted for over 20%, of the strong stock performance that we're seeing now. And so tech is definitely, where we're seeing the bulk of the movement and the force right now with investable opportunities. Definitely, I would look out for obviously cybersecurity and those types of industries as well, and obviously AI and cloud.
Yeah,
and words for today.
It's so erratic right now too. I mean, right before the election and with all the earnings reports coming out and the surge in the pandemic, and there's other elements too, it could go on and on, but I don't even bother to check my stocks at the moment because it's too
up and down.
The pattern is chaos right now, but I agree with David. The broad areas that he mentioned, those are the areas that we spoke about throughout the whole course of this session. Anything to do with digital transformation or AI, the tech stocks, the big companies are just going to keep growing and get bigger. I would keep an eye on any public smaller companies that are doing things in like edge or AI or any areas that we mentioned that potentially have an explosive stock moment. It's kind of hard to say at the moment.
No, I think that's great. I think, there's definitely a lot of food for thought for this group here. So our next question is about, firms, with staff who's, working from home in a hybrid environment. And, I've got folks maybe in the office and then everybody else is working from home. How can we ensure, employee engagement and culture transfer between these groups of populations?
Yeah, and so I think we sort of touched on some of this before, right? The sort of the mental checks, and the checking on people and really, having, so one of the big things in employee engagement and HR service has sort of, been the performance review, right? That was sort of this one annual year thing that we did. And then we began to learn that, hey, maybe we should do this more often and more frequently, right? And to really, keep a pulse on how people are doing, how they're feeling. And again, to my point, how are they experiencing work, right? How are they experiencing the workplace? And so I think is having more repetitive and frequent, checks on people, making sure that they have the tools that they need, to actually get their jobs done, And so one of my things is, I found InFlow analysis, and one of my things is that the technology has come back into the flow of how people actually work. If it's above flow or out of flow, it's going to cause friction. And so we have to check and make sure people have the right tools in place and just make sure prioritize people's mental health and do those sorts of checks on people as well to make sure that they're communicating, that they're connecting, and see what kind of help they need.
It's a funny juxtaposition of, there are probably some folks that only had that annual performance review interaction with their manager, and now they're on a daily cadence.
Exactly.
180.
It needs to be so funny. So years ago, I was at an HR tech conference, and when we used to do those sorts of things and go to conferences, and I remember this guy, gets up on stage. Nothing against the guy, but he's like, it's time to bring the human back into HR, and I'm like, they never left. They've always been there, right? And so, but again, it's to that whole thing, like focus on people centricity, and how they're experiencing, again, whether it's the EX part of it or that CX part I mentioned before, it's how are people actually experiencing you, the internal workplace, and also the external, them as a customer brand.
Okay, great. Let's do a couple more questions here. So, Dave, maybe you can take this one. How do we measure and compare productivity between tech employees that are working together and remotely? And how can you judge knowledge transfer?
Or if I could figure that out, man, dude, I would be like bigger than the big five, right? And it's
The big break.
I'd have my models and oh man. But so with technology measurement, it's definitely going to be about, how do you follow the effects of whatever the implementation is of whatever tools you bring in. And I think that the initial part of that is making sure, again, that tools are coming down into the flow of how people work, and any investment in technology tools and workplace tools has to be with, the input of the actual people who are going to be using the tools. And so once you have that and you have, specific use cases, and you're matching the use case to actual, specific usability, right? Like match the tools to actual critical capabilities that you want to use. So match those things. And then you begin to measure the effects of that, so with using this tool, it's easy to say, with like video conferencing, we can sort of replace, this amount of travel, with video conferences. That's easy. But with some of the softer stuff, you have to follow the effects of that. Are you sort of meeting the team outcomes in a quicker time? So time almost becomes a currency, and you can sort of measure, in terms of time cut or time added, whether it's benefit to any sort of technology tools.
No, that's great. And I think there's still a lot of work that needs to be done in this space. And this is maybe where we see a lot of niche players coming up, right?
Yeah.
People thinking about home and how to measure the productivity.
Absolutely.
All right.
Yeah, a lot of system integrators. And I think you also asked about the knowledge transfer stuff. Yeah. And so sorry to answer, but that's another big thing, right? So now with the workplace, right? And we're seeing where a generation is leaving the workforce, right? And baby boomers and so forth, and a new generation is coming in. There is a definite need for knowledge transfer as well. So we're seeing a lot of learning management tools begin to emerge, a lot of use of video and video content management to capture knowledge, right? And then be able to disseminate that and have that easily accessible, to people.
That's great. And so we have two more questions here. The next one's asking, what is the weakest link in the tech stack with everybody working from home?
Wow. I just saw that game show last night too, the weakest link. Sorry.
Right, come back.
You are the weakest link. That's an interesting one. What is the weakest link, Nicki?
In the tech stack, I mean, like tech infrastructure, or are we?
I mean, it could be both. I mean, I think the weakest link in the infrastructure is our on-premise, right? Like people have to stop that.
Gotcha. Yeah.
I mean, it could be, especially maybe more relevant back in April, just the pure bandwidth issues that we were all having,
Right.
and still continue to have. I mean,
Yes.
I know we all experience calls where like people are frozen, or it's like something doesn't work. So without going down the 5G rabbit hole, we only have 3 minutes left. That's another topic that
A whole other hour or two.
Yeah. There's a lot of debate around that, but there also still is a lot of positive speculation that this will help to mitigate some of the connectivity problems, especially supporting environments that used to be very collected in large cities and now dispersed. So still the same number of people, you're just supporting them in geographic dispersion in ways that we didn't have to before. So that changes how things are wired.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and to me too, I think I sort of look at the workplace or the tech workplace as a sort of an architecture, and so there is the interaction that people are actually engaged in, and underneath that is the application that they use that power those interactions, and then there the services, whether it's AI, that provide automation for that, or the business application stuff that's powering, some of that stuff, where the CRM, and then there's the content, that's sort of powering the data for that stuff, right? And I think when you look at investing in technology, you then have to think about that architecture, right?
Right.
And if there's a weak link there in terms of, something that's not integrating correctly with the overall stack, with the overall solution, then that's a problem, and that can cause friction. So yeah, that's how I would look at it. Yeah.
No, I think that's fantastic. And so to bring us home here, Dave, the last question is asking, what is a world-class work from home setup? And I feel like you must have it. Got the lighting right, your camera's in the right place. Tell us what you're doing.
Yeah, I know.
So one interesting byproducts, I guess, of this pandemic is the industry canceling of all tech conferences. That's actually how Nicki and I met, and how you and I met, Asha.
Yeah.
At a conference. And so, I mean, I was on the road a bunch, right, doing concerts, and I have the badges and hotel key cards to prove it. But we had to shift to virtual, and so for me, who does what I'm doing now, speaking, I had to invest in technology, sort of improve, I guess, my production value. And so I started to even do a live show. I'm doing a podcast with Nicki that you were on, Asha. And so I had to invest in, I guess, better quality, camera for a webcam, lights, microphones, and also to improve my virtual events. So for me, on a Zoom call like this, I'll give you a little bit of the under the hood here. There's a light over here at a 45-degree angle shining on me. I'm in front of a window looking at my backyard, so I get natural sunlight coming here on my left side. So funny story, when I was a Gartner and my first ever, sort of video first presentation, I've gone my whole life with the distinction I've never worn makeup. And so I sat down for this thing, and my God, they powdered my nose. They put on foundation. I mean, I felt pretty, And so I've now lost the distinction, that I've never worn makeup anymore. But so those are things, again, I had to do here in terms of, just making sure that my environment was good. I bought a plan from Amazon to put up a picture, but there is a lot that's now people are looking into. I've known people who are now buying ring lights, for their
they're like sold
right?
out on Amazon.
Yeah, exactly. Sold out on Amazon. But so people now realize that we're going to be home for a while. How do I improve my environment? And I also want to say, and Nicki and I have had this conversation before, don't worry about your environment. We're all in the same position. The dog's going to bark, the kids are going to walk in the door,
right.
just it's life, right? So yes, you can improve certain things like lights and cameras and so forth, but don't, if you don't have that, don't think that you're any less. It's
right.
all about just doing what you can with what you have.
As long as your voice can be heard, that's the most important thing. Right?
Exactly. I'm just a little crazy and kind of psycho.
Well, Dave and Nicki, thank you so much for being part of this first Tech Trends webinar hosted by the MIT Sloan Club in New York. It's been great having you here for the past hour, talking about cloud computing, artificial intelligence, employee experience, customer experience, and work from home. So thank you again.
Thank you for having us.
All right.
Nice
Take care. Bye, everyone.
Awesome. Bye, guys.